He walked into my courtroom at 9:47 in the morning, adjusting his cufflinks. 3 assistants followed behind him, carrying briefcases, tablets, and what appeared to be architectural blueprints. He didn't look like a man appearing before a judge. He looked like a man arriving at a meeting he fully expected to chair. Within 40 minutes, he would be in handcuffs, and the next morning, sitting on a narrow jail mattress in orange coveralls, he would say 2 words I have thought about many times since. I was wrong. If you believe that the law should hold the same for everyone, whether they arrive in a limousine or on a city bus, subscribe before we go any further. This story is one worth sharing. Now let me tell you about Richard Blackstone. I had been reading his file since 6 o'clock that morning. It was thick. 17 code violations across 3 years. Unpaid fines totaling $67,000. Construction projects that bypassed safety regulations. Tenants displaced without proper notice. Environmental violations buried under expensive legal motions. And at the bottom of every citation, every fine, every hearing notice, the same response from his legal team: dismiss, reduce, delay, never comply. I set the file down and thought about the people who lived in Richard Blackstone's buildings. The 86 families at Riverside Apartments. The 37 families crammed into a building approved for 24. The people whose children played at a school 50 yards from where his company had dumped construction debris. Then I went to work. The courtroom was already full when he arrived. Regular citizens sat in the gallery, waiting for their cases to be called. Parking tickets, small disputes, minor infractions. The everyday legal business of people who couldn't afford teams of lawyers or architectural blueprints to explain their presence. They watched as Blackstone's entourage fill the first 2 rows, spreading documents across multiple seats as though setting up a boardroom presentation. My clerk, Miss Chen, called the session to order. All rise for the honorable judge. The gallery rose. Blackstone remained seated, speaking quietly to his lead attorney while reviewing something on his phone. I took the bench. I reviewed the docket. I called his case. Case number 2025-CD8847, City of Providence versus Blackstone Development Group. Multiple code violations, unpaid fines, failure to appear for 3 scheduled hearings. Blackstone approached the defendant's table with the casual confidence of someone who had walked into difficult rooms before and walked out the winner every time. His lead attorney, a man named Steinberg, followed closely. Before Steinberg could speak, Blackstone did. Your Honor, I'm not going to waste your time or mine pretending these violations matter. I employ 1,200 people in this city. My developments generate $43 million in annual tax revenue. 3 hospitals, 2 schools, and a community center exist because I built them. So let's be realistic about what's happening here. The courtroom went silent. I set my pen down slowly. Mr. Blackstone, you haven't answered my question. How do you plead to these charges? He looked at me directly. I plead reality, Your Honor. These are paperwork problems, not real problems. My buildings are safer than 90% of the structures in this city. My tenants are cared for. My projects create jobs. If you want to fine me $67,000 for having the wrong permits on file, that's your choice. But we both know that money means nothing to me, and these violations mean nothing to this community. I began reading the citations aloud, one by one. Citation number 1. Riverside Apartments, 447 Elmwood Avenue. Fire safety equipment inspection overdue by 18 months. Occupancy continued without valid safety certification. Fine assessed at $4,000. I looked at him. Mr. Blackstone, why was this inspection 18 months overdue? Your Honor, that building houses 86 families. We've had 0 fire incidents and 0 safety complaints. The inspection was delayed because we were upgrading the entire system with better equipment. Sometimes excellence takes time. The inspection was delayed because you didn't schedule it. Excellence would have been maintaining compliance while upgrading. Did you notify tenants that they were living in a building without current safety certification? He waved his hand slightly. We don't alarm tenants with bureaucratic technicalities. Those technicalities could save their lives. I moved to the second citation. Harborview Complex, 892 Westminster Street. Construction of additional residential units without permits. Overcrowding beyond approved capacity. You converted storage spaces into rental units, increasing occupancy from 24 units to 37 in a building approved for 24. Is that correct? That's correct, and I'm proud of it. Housing is expensive in Providence. I created 13 additional affordable units that wouldn't exist otherwise. The city should be thanking me. The city should be ensuring those units have proper ventilation, adequate electrical capacity, and emergency exits. Did you consider what happens if there's a fire and 37 families need to evacuate through exits designed for 24? Your Honor, I've been developing real estate for 28 years. I know more about building safety than most of the inspectors who write these citations. Your confidence in your own expertise does not substitute for compliance with safety codes written by engineers and approved by elected officials. He stepped slightly closer to the table. His voice changed, not louder, but harder. The businessman making his case was giving way to something else. Your Honor, with all due respect, I didn't build what I've built by waiting for government permission to solve problems. While bureaucrats debate, I build. While committees study, I create jobs and opportunities. These code violations are speed bumps. Mr. Blackstone, those speed bumps exist because buildings have collapsed when developers cut corners. Those regulations exist because people have died in fires when safety systems were not maintained. You may see them as inconveniences. The families in your buildings see them as the difference between going home and not going home. Then we reached citation number 3, Commerce Plaza, 156 Federal Street. Improper disposal of construction debris, including asbestos-containing materials. Environmental safety violation. Fine assessed at $15,000. The gallery stirred. Someone in the back whispered the word asbestos. Mr. Blackstone, this citation indicates that construction debris from your Commerce Plaza renovation was disposed of in an unauthorized location without proper environmental testing. The debris tested positive for asbestos. Is that accurate? Steinberg stepped forward immediately. Your Honor, my client was not personally involved in the disposal decisions. That was handled by subcontractors. I'm asking Mr. Blackstone directly. Blackstone shrugged. Demolition creates debris. Debris needs to go somewhere. We hired professionals. If they made errors, that's their responsibility. Where did the debris go? I don't micromanage waste disposal. I picked up the environmental impact report. According to this report, the debris was dumped in a lot adjacent to Lincoln Elementary School, 50 yards from a playground where children play every day. I looked up. Did you know that? A woman in the third row stood up before I could continue. My daughter goes to Lincoln Elementary. I nodded to her gently and asked her to be seated. Her face said everything that needed to be said. Blackstone's jaw tightened. Your Honor, that report is preliminary. The actual risk assessment showed minimal exposure. Children were never in danger. Minimal exposure to asbestos, Mr. Blackstone? Are you a medical doctor now, in addition to being your own building inspector? I deal in facts, not hysteria. The cleanup was completed within 48 hours. I read from the report. Initial site assessment indicates potential exposure risk to approximately 300 children who utilize the adjacent playground during normal school hours. Duration of exposure unknown. Full health impact assessment pending. The woman in the gallery stood again, quietly this time. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Mr. Blackstone, you became aware of this situation when inspectors discovered the violation during a routine site visit, 3 weeks after the dumping occurred. 3 weeks of children playing 50 yards from asbestos debris because your company made decisions that saved money and cost safety. Is that accurate? He consulted his tablet. The timeline is documented in the remediation report. Yes, it is. Then he made the decision that changed everything. He looked at me with a different expression than he'd worn all morning. The businessman facade was gone. What remained was something colder and more direct. Your Honor, let me be clear. I am not everyone else. I employ 1,200 people directly and probably 3,000 more through my projects. I am what makes this city work. If you want to shut me down over paperwork violations, you're not just affecting me. You're affecting every family that depends on the jobs I create, every business that benefits from my developments, every community program that exists because of the taxes I pay. I looked at him carefully. Mr. Blackstone, are you threatening this court with economic consequences if I enforce municipal codes against your company? I'm explaining reality. You can call it whatever you want. I call it attempted intimidation of a judicial proceeding. Steinberg rose quickly. Your Honor, my client is simply providing context. Your client is telling me that enforcing the law against him would harm the community. That is not context, counselor. That is leverage. Blackstone turned to his attorney, said something sharp and quiet, then turned back to me. When he spoke again, his voice was flat and final. Your Honor, I've been polite. I've tried to help you understand the bigger picture. But let me be absolutely clear. I am above these petty municipal code violations. I contribute more to this city than anyone in this courtroom, including you. My buildings house thousands of families. My projects employ hundreds of workers. My tax payments fund the very salary you collect for sitting behind that bench. The courtroom froze. I sat with those words for 10 seconds, 15, 20. The silence was complete. When I spoke, my voice was barely above a whisper. Mr. Blackstone, did you just tell this court that you consider yourself above the law? He looked at me with a smile that had nothing warm in it. Your Honor, I am the law in this city. When buildings need to be built, they call me. When jobs need to be created, they call me. When the city needs revenue, they call me. So yes, I am above these petty violations because I am what makes this city work. I turned to my bailiff. Officer Martinez, please approach the bench. The handcuffs clicked into place at 10:23 in the morning. The sound carried through that courtroom like nothing else I've heard in 38 years. Not loud, just final. Blackstone stood motionless for 3 full seconds, staring at his wrists. The Armani suit, the gold cufflinks catching the fluorescent light, the Rolex he checked 3 times since walking in. This isn't happening, he said quietly. This doesn't happen to people like me. Officer Martinez was professional, calm, and entirely unmoved. Sir, please come with me. Steinberg was on his feet, papers scattering. Your Honor, we request an immediate recess. Your client had multiple opportunities to show respect for this court and chose instead to declare himself above the law. The contempt finding is immediate. As Martinez guided Blackstone toward the side door, Blackstone turned back once. You're making a mistake, Judge, a very expensive mistake. I made a note in my docket. Ms. Chen, please call the next case. The next case was a parking ticket. Maria Santos, 34 years old, stood at the defendant's table in work clothes. She was clearly nervous about missing time from her job. She explained quietly and without drama that she had received a citation while taking her elderly mother to a medical appointment. The accessible parking spaces were all taken. She couldn't find legal parking within 2 blocks. She left her hazard lights on and stayed with the car. The parking enforcement officer confirmed what she said. He had seen her helping her mother in a wheelchair. Miss Santos, I said, why didn't you use the hospital's valet service? They charged $25, Your Honor. I couldn't afford it. I worked 2 jobs to pay for my mother's medications. I looked at the citation. then at her. You took responsibility for your mother's care. You stayed with your vehicle. You were there for a legitimate medical need. I closed the file. Citation dismissed. Please see the clerk about documentation that may help with future medical visits. Thank you, Your Honor. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She left without fanfare. No attorneys, no blueprints, no entourage. Just a woman who had come in, told the truth, and been heard. The contrast needed no explanation. That evening, Richard Blackstone sat on a narrow metal bench in a detention cell, wearing standard-issue coveralls. His Rolex was in property storage. His phone was in property storage. The three assistants with the tablets and blueprints were in the courthouse lobby, making urgent phone calls that couldn't reach him. A young corrections officer making his rounds paused at the cell. "You doing okay, Mr. Blackstone?" Blackstone looked up. "Have you ever been to Commerce Plaza downtown?" "Yes, sir. Nice building. I built that. Took 3 years. Employed 400 people during construction. Houses 60 businesses now." The officer nodded. "That's impressive, sir. So why am I sitting in a jail cell over paperwork violations?" The officer considered the question with the kind of honesty you only get from people who have nothing to gain from flattering you. "I don't know much about business, Mr. Blackstone, but I know that when people come into court, they're expected to show respect. Doesn't matter if they're rich or poor. The judge treats everyone the same." Blackstone repeated it quietly. "Everyone the same." "Yes, sir. That's kind of the point." The officer continued his rounds. Blackstone sat alone with that thought for a long time. At 9 o'clock the following morning, he was escorted back into my courtroom. No Armani, no cufflinks, no entourage spreading blueprints across the front rows. He stood at the defendant's table in orange coveralls, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked like what he actually was, a man who had made choices and was now facing them. The gallery watched, some of the same faces from the day before. The woman whose daughter attended Lincoln Elementary sat in the 3rd row. She didn't stand. She just watched. "Mr. Blackstone," I said, "you've had the night to reflect on your statements to this court. Do you wish to address your contempt citation?" He looked around the room, slowly, like he was seeing it for the first time. Then he looked at me. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I was wrong." He didn't rush it. He didn't hedge it. He didn't let his attorney clean it up. I let my frustration override my respect for this court and the law it represents. I said things that were not just disrespectful, they were wrong. I've spent so long operating at a level where I could control outcomes that I forgot some things can't be controlled. Some things shouldn't be. He paused. The children near that school, the families in those apartments without proper fire inspections. I told myself those were technicalities. I told myself I knew better. He stopped again. I didn't know better. I just knew how to avoid being told I was wrong. The courtroom was completely still. I looked at him for a long moment. I have sat on this bench for 38 years. I have seen many kinds of sorry. Sorry that is performed for the camera. Sorry that is calculated to reduce a sentence. Sorry that is simply the word arranged to sound like meaning. What I heard from Richard Blackstone that morning was something quieter and less prepared. It was the sound of a man who had spent a night with himself and hadn't liked what he found. "Mr. Blackstone, you will complete the remainder of your contempt sentence. All 17 code violations will be brought into full compliance within 60 days under your personal oversight. All fines will be paid in full. Every property you own or manage in this city will submit to quarterly safety inspections for the next 2 years. These inspections will be conducted by the city, not by inspectors you select." He nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. And one more thing. The families in those 37 units at Harborview, the ones living in spaces that were never approved for occupancy, they will not be displaced. You will bring those units into compliance at your expense. They stay in their homes." A long pause. "Yes, Your Honor." The story ran nationally by afternoon. Most headlines focused on the arrest, the billionaire developer, the handcuffs, the orange coveralls. But the part I keep returning to isn't any of that. It's what the young corrections officer said to him through a cell door in the evening. The judge treats everyone the same. That's kind of the point. Simple, obvious. Something most of us were taught before we were 10 years old. And yet, Richard Blackstone had lived for decades in a world where that sentence was not true, where wealth created distance from consequences, where the right attorney, the right donation, the right phone call could transform accountability into a technicality. He had not started out believing himself above the law. He had learned it, slowly, through 1,000 accommodations and exceptions and problems made to disappear. The way anyone learns anything, through repetition, through what the world teaches you when it gives you something different from what it gives everyone else. That is not an excuse. He still made choices. He still dumped debris near a school. He still put families in units without proper fire inspections. He still stood in my courtroom and said words that cannot be unsaid. But I think about how that happens, how a person arrives at the place where they genuinely believe the rules are for other people, how they get there step by step, accommodation by accommodation, until one ordinary Tuesday morning, they walk into a courtroom expecting the world to continue rearranging itself around them, and they meet something that doesn't move. I think about Maria Santos more than I think about Richard Blackstone, a woman who works 2 jobs to pay for her mother's medications, who couldn't afford $25 for hospital parking, who stood in front of me in work clothes, clearly worried about the time she was losing, and told me exactly what happened, without embellishment or strategy. She didn't demand anything. She just told the truth and trusted that it would be enough. It was enough. That is what justice is supposed to feel like. Not triumphant, not dramatic. Just enough. Enough to make a woman feel seen. Enough to send her back to her mother and her 2 jobs, knowing that someone had looked at her situation honestly and called it what it was. That is what I am here for, not to humiliate the powerful, not to protect the powerful from embarrassment, to make the scale balance for Maria Santos and Richard Blackstone both. The same law, the same standard, the same honest look at what actually happened. When that scale holds, when it doesn't tip for money or influence or the threat of economic consequences, something happens in the room. I have felt it many times. People exhale. They remember that the system they have been taught to believe in is still, in this room, on this day, worth believing in. That matters more than any single verdict. It matters because a woman in the 3rd row watched her daughter's safety treated as something real, not a technical issue, not a paperwork problem, something real that deserved a real response. And it matters because somewhere, a man in orange coveralls sat with a tray of institutional food and heard something from a 23-year-old corrections officer that all his money had never taught him. Everyone the same. That's kind of the point. If this story moved you, if you believe that the scale of justice should balance the same for everyone, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe if you haven't already. Every week, stories from this bench. Real people, real moments, real justice. Court is adjourned.